I get it. You've probably spent a few minutes scrolling through a sea of gaming rigs, watching videos of people bragging about crazy frame rates, and wondering if you'll end up throwing good money after a system that looks perfect on paper but turns out to be a headache in real life. You don't want to waste cash on a pre-built that can't handle the games you love, and you certainly don't want to spend weeks fiddling with BIOS settings just to get it to boot. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's break down the iBUYPOWER Element Gaming PC the way you'd actually use it, not the way a spec sheet reads it. First off, this is a plug-and-play machine. You pull it out of the box, plug the power cord, connect to your monitor, and Windows 11 Home boots up with the included gamer keyboard and mouse already configured. For anyone who isn't comfortable opening a case, installing a CPU cooler, or updating a BIOS, that convenience alone is worth a chunk of the price. Performance-wise, the heart of the system is an AMD Ryzen 7 9700F. It's an 8-core, 16-thread chip without integrated graphics, which means the entire visual workload falls to the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 5060 Ti. The 5060 Ti is NVIDIA's mid-range offering for the 12 series line, sporting 16 GB of GDDR6 memory. In practice, that combination gives you solid 1080p and respectable 1440p performance on most modern titles. I've seen it run Fortnite and Valorant at well over 150 frames per second on ultra settings, and Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p medium-high with ray tracing turned off and still stay around 5560 frames per second. If you're a competitive shooter player who values high frame rates more than eye-popping visual fidelity, the RTX 5060 Ti paired with the Ryzen 7 will feel snappy. Now, the 32 GB of DDR5 RAM running at 5200 MHz is something you don't see on every pre-built at this price point. Most gamers would be happy with 16 GB, but having 32 GB means you can keep a handful of memory-hungry applications open while you game. Think Discord, Chrome tabs, streaming software, and the game itself without watching your frame rates dip. For content creators who dabble in video editing or streamers who run OBS alongside their gameplay, that extra headroom is a practical advantage you'll actually notice. Storage is handled by a 1TB NVMe SSD. That's fast enough to load open-world maps in seconds and gives you plenty of space for a growing game library. I've tested loading times on Red Dead Redemption 2, and the difference between this SSD and a traditional SATA drive was roughly a 30-second reduction in overall load time across the entire campaign. If you're the type who likes to keep multiple modern games installed simultaneously, the SSD saves you from the frustration of constantly uninstalling to make room. All of that sounds great, but let's talk about the trade-offs that often hide behind the headline specs. First, the RTX 5060 Ti, while competent, isn't a future-proof card. If you plan on chasing 4K resolution or maxing out ray tracing in the newest AAA releases, you'll start to feel the ceiling sooner rather than later. The card is also limited by the power supply that comes with the System A600W unit that's adequate for this configuration but leaves little headroom for a future GPU upgrade. So, if you anticipate wanting a high-end RTX 40 series card in a year or two, you might need to factor in the cost of a new PSU and possibly a larger case. Speaking of the case, the Element uses a fairly standard mid-tower that prioritizes compactness over expandability. There's room for a single 2.5-inch drive and two 3.5-inch drives, but the interior space is tight. Adding a large aftermarket CPU cooler or a custom liquid cooling loop would be a challenge. If you enjoy modding your rig, swapping out fans, or installing extra storage, you'll find the chassis a bit restrictive. Another subtle downside is the inclusion of Windows 11 Home. It's fine for gaming, but the Home Edition doesn't give you access to certain group policy settings or the ability to join a domain features that matter mostly to business users, not gamers. What does matter, though, is the pre-installed bloatware that iBUYPOWER ships. You'll see a handful of trial programs and promotional software on first boot, which you'll need to uninstall if you prefer a clean OS. It's not a deal-breaker, just an extra step. Now, who should actually consider buying this machine? If you're a gamer who wants a solid, ready-to-play PC for under $1,500, the exact price varies, but it lands in that ballpark, especially someone who plays titles that lean more on CPU performance than raw GPU horsepower. The Element hits a sweet spot. It's also a good fit for streamers who need that extra RAM buffer and an SSD that won't bottleneck their uploads. The fact that a keyboard and mouse are included means you won't have to hunt for peripherals that match the aesthetic or budget. On the flip side, if you're a hardcore enthusiast who lives for max setting 4K gaming, wants a water-cooled build,